Welcome to our first Fireside chat for 2025. We wish all our Dharma friends a Happy New Year as we continue to explore basic Buddhism for the West and beyond. I am Igor Makasiuk of the Palo Alto, California Buddhist Temple, one of the 5 volunteers in our steering committee who help bring these sessions to you. I'll be serving as your MC today. For our first Fireside chat for 2025, we will cover the foundation of Buddhism, the Four Noble Truths. Tonight's chat will amplify and clarify questions you may have had after reading Chapter 5 in Jewels. A short questionnaire has been sent to you in the last email. After our Fireside chat is over today, please consider responding to the questions. In the Buddhist spirit of interdependence, we ask that you please keep your video screen on during the session while you are at your monitor. Seeing one another will put this Buddhist spirit of interdependence into practice. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our instructor and moderator. Dr. Tanaka, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Igor. I should note that Igor has become a Kyoshi ordinand, so he officially should be called Reverend Makasiuk. But anyway, congratulations and on hard work, and so we look forward to your leadership.
Thank you.
Okay. And did I say Happy New Year to everybody? Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
So I'll be sending our family greetings to you later. That's on a personal level. So I'd like to get started. I want to take a few minutes today to kind of go over the literature and the resources that you have to study further. I have mentioned it before, but I just wanted to let you know exactly where it is. So you have been given instructions as to how to get to the Google Drive, and so once you get into this, and you'll be given instructions as to how to get in. And if you notice, at the very top here, you have the meditation tapes, audio tapes. So we have had 2, A and B, and then today we had the C. So we'll have 2 more afterwards. This is the course description. And then after this, number 1, a number of about 6 of number 1, this is the first lesson that we had or class in September. And so number 1 and number 1, it has to do with the outline in Word and also in PowerPoint. More importantly, 1, 2 is the video recordings. So you can always go back and study them. And then you have the question responses of participants. So this has all the responses by the participants that you can go in and you can click to see if you to read the whole thing. And then 1.4 are those selected questions which I responded to and discussed at the in-depth session. So, and then this 1.5, the 5th one, is an audio recording of the in-depth discussion. We have an hour and a half, but we don't do the middle 30 minutes, but we do the first 30 minutes and last 30 minutes. We have discussion. So that's been recorded as well. So you have an entire set of resources to study this, and I don't know how many of you are earnest enough or serious enough to check all of it. I think it's too much, but for some of the ones that you want to review, I recommend you go back. So 2 is the October class, and 3 is the November class, and 4 is the December class, and this was the 5th one. Okay, so there you have it. So feel free to go back and review, and you can encourage any friends that you have to go in and study it. So okay, if you have any questions about that, you can ask me later or ask us later. So here, so today's talk. Okay, so I'm going to go probably a few minutes longer because of what I just talked about. But okay, so Four Noble Truths is a set of teachings that is so basic. It's the big framework in which you find Buddhism being introduced. Today we have the lay guest speaker, Kaethe Kauffman from Honolulu, and then Hoshina Seki from New York, who is the president of the American Buddhist Academy. Okay, so with regard to the Four Noble Truths, I know that some of you are quite, versed in it, but I need to go over the basics for some of the beginners. But I will have something more advanced, hopefully, for you to munch on. And the background of this Four Noble Truths, and I discussed it earlier in one of the earlier classes that when Buddha was enlightened, he hesitated to share the teachings because he thought that people wouldn't understand. But it was a Hindu god Brahma who came down and told him, "You must share your teachings with the world, and maybe not everyone may be ready, but some would be." So it was that coaxing by the Brahma that Buddha thought, well, then I will go and begin to share. And actually, it's not as well known, and this is not even in the book Jewels, but Buddha actually taught a more simpler teaching of moral teachings to lay people. And it was basically kind of a religious teaching that we often hear about, which is that be ethical, be moral, and that will get you to a better realm after your passing. So Buddha knew that he could not teach maybe the Four Noble Truths to ordinary people, so he had a simpler teaching. But afterwards, he decided to really share the heart of his teachings, and he taught it to the five monks with whom he had studied and practiced with during his ascetic years. And the teachings, the Four Noble Truths, is actually quite sophisticated. That's one of the points I wish for you to come away with today. And it's an advanced teaching because it requires someone to be able to understand the nature of what is being said and then follow that up by kind of a serious practice and application. And so the Sanskrit of the original Four Noble Truths is called cattāri ariyasaccāni. And this has actually been, this is not in the book either, and probably a lot of people don't know, but the most recent scholarship says that scholarship is saying that the true translation is not Four Noble Truths, but the Four Truths of the Noble One or the Noble Ones. So it's the teaching for the noble or the advanced and or people who are serious. So that goes to give us a sense of the nature of the Four Noble Truths, that it's not simply, it's not, it takes an effort to fully understand and then to practice it. Because the Buddha had taught a simpler teaching to others beforehand. Okay, so the Four Noble Truths calls for change in our outlook. Thus, so that's why I've been saying Buddhism is a religion of awakening or transformation. So, these words, change, awakening, transformation, point to the need for us to transform and change the way we look at the world and my life. And so, first truth, we all experience suffering. Some people say life is suffering. I don't care for that because it's so dogmatic that it's not saying that, eventually life is more than suffering. I mean, there's nirvana you awaken to. So I think it's better to say we all experience suffering. And the cause of our suffering lies in our attachment to the three poisons. The cause of three poisons. Okay, so this is the cause, and just like in the Jewel's book, we have the greedy dog. It was his greed that caused suffering. Well, for the puppy, as simple as that. And there are more. I'll go give some other examples of it. We can say that, um, Putin of Russia has, because of his egocentricity and desire and greed, he has brought on great suffering for the Ukrainian people. So this also takes place on a macro level as well. But even though we all experience suffering, there is a third truth, which is that our suffering ceases when awakening is realized. So suffering can come to a cessation with the awakening. Fourth truth, there is the Eightfold Noble Path for realizing the awakening. So this is the fourth truth, which is the way to, how to. And we will actually talk about this in the next month, in the next chapter. Okay, so this is as often is talked about in terms of like a medical doctor examining or determining the symptoms. So the first one is like a symptom, and there is a cause, and there's a way to get better. And if it works, then you regain your health again. So it's quite logical. It's not something that we need to believe or we can confirm it in our lives. So first truth is a result of the second. And so there's a cause and effect relationship. Second truth is the cause of the first. And the fourth truth, the practice, is a cause that will lead to the third truth. And so just like with so if you use a medical metaphor, that you have a headache, the first truth. Second truth, the cause of that is stress. And then the path is to, do things to get rid of the stress, and you will get better. So that's a way of kind of looking at the big picture of the Four Noble Truths. So let's go into the first truth. And the first truth, there are 8. I have the 8th one in the next frame. But it's the birth, aging, illness, death. This is more physical, and birth is there's a huge question as to why is birth considered one of the sufferings. When we have a newly born, we're all happy. But from the Buddhist perspective, birth is dukkha because you are coming into a life that ultimately will end in dukkha if you don't become enlightened. So birth and death go together, and so with regard to this, there is a kind of my favorite Buddhist joke, which I will say quickly, there was a devout Buddhist medical examiner who was very, very serious about his religion, but he took it into his job. And one time he got fired because when he wrote the death certificate and gave the cause of death, often it's like heart attack or stroke or something like that. But his problem was that he wrote the cause of death the same thing every time. In in the report, death certificate, he would write the same cause. And what he wrote, cause of death, he wrote birth. I hope you're smiling. Yeah, why do we have death? Because we're born. And so in that sense, Buddhism has a kind of a naturalistic attitude towards death. Death is not a failure. Death is not, a punishment, but it's a natural course of being birthed. But nevertheless, death is definitely a source of dukkha and suffering. Having meet up with people in situations we do not like, having to separate from people in situations we like, not getting what we want. So this one, having to meet up with people and situations we do not like, well, in our the Aesop tale, who encountered this? Well, it's the puppy. Puppy encountered a situation where the greedy dog took his bone. And we have situations like that, and more, in our lives, meeting up with people that we don't get along with. And during the meditation session earlier, Leo talked about people at work, who give you a hard time, or a hard boss. I mean, we have situations where we have to deal with people that we don't get along with, and that is definitely one of the sources of suffering. Not getting what we want is kind of a catch-all. It's I mean, we want to live forever, but we cannot do that. We don't want to feel, we don't want to get sick and become ill, but we do that. So the eighth one is the one that requires a little more explanation, and normally it's not explained very well, but I'm going to give it a try in a very short time that we have. And I won't be able to do a thorough job, but I just want you to get a sense. So the eighth one has to do with attachment to the 5 physical psychological components or constituent functions. In Sanskrit, it's called skandhas. Usually it's translated like aggregates, but and these are the 5. So actually, body or more 5 senses. So these 5 physical it's more psychological than anything. Only physical part is the 5 senses. But every moment, every second, we are going through this process. Right now, you are, for example, sensing through you're hearing my voice, and you're seeing me, on Zoom. And then you have a feeling, and Buddhism says there are 3: positive, negative, or neutral. Well, I hope it's positive. I hope it's not negative. And then, so you, and this is my creation. And just understand, this is my attempt to try to make it easier to understand, is that the 5 senses, and it triggers, you see me, you hear me, and you have a positive, negative, or neutral feeling. And then you have some thoughts about it. Well, you might be saying, well, he's talking too fast, or, he's not explaining well enough, or something. And then you have an intention. This is like volition, mental volition. You say, well, I'll stay and listen to what he has to say. Okay. But whether or not you really do that finally ends up with this consciousness at the end, in the middle. And this is the content of the consciousness differs from different people. we see one thing and people react differently. So whatever you have in this consciousness, which later becomes like storehouse consciousness, that will determine how we even feel and how we think and how we intend. So anyway, so every second we go through this process, and the problem is that we become attached to it, or we become attached from the standpoint of thinking egotistically. And so if I use an example of the greedy dog, okay, he, when he first sees the puppy with a juicy bone, you know, and he probably even smelled it and it felt good. And so he thought, well, he's a little puppy and, I want it, so I want it. But if he were more Buddhistic, he would not be attached to that feeling of wanting it. He would say, well, I would just let it go, not become attached to it. But because his consciousness, his content of his being is more egotistical, and he feels I'm bigger than the puppy and I want that. So what he does is I want it. That's a desire, grasping, and then finally he makes a decision. The consciousness here, and then so that he takes the bone away from the puppy, and at so for the puppy, of course, this is a source of dukkha and suffering. And actually, the greedy dog himself is probably not very happy. I mean, he's angry, he's kind of greedy, and so he's not at peace with himself. So, I would like to suggest that you kind of think, I actually do, when I do meditation, as I have done more mindfulness, it's helped me to really pick up on my feelings and my thoughts. So if it's kind of a negative, I have been a little bit better in not grasping at it. I had an incident about half a year ago where, for an academic group that I'm involved in, one of the steering committee members who was much younger than me, this is in Japan, and what happened was I had asked for a roster of the members of the academic group to the person in charge. But this other lady, she steps in, even though she's just a treasurer, she writes back and tells me, no, you cannot have it. And she does this X thing like this. In Japan, that's kind of rude. And he says, it's, but the way she responded was very unnatural. And anybody, the other members of the steering committee were all agree with me that, it was a very rude way of responding. And I, of course, felt a negative feeling here. And my thought was, well, what is she doing? I mean, you never respond in that way. You could be a little bit more courteous, but, well, I can't go into the details, but fortunately, because I was able to catch my feelings and thoughts, I didn't react as I would have done maybe 25 years ago, And then so I just let it go. And then afterwards, the more I thought, my heart was pounding. And so I knew that deep down, I really felt that this was a very rude behavior, and I was very much put off. So I was feeling a lot, but fortunately, I didn't respond, quickly as immediately as I would have done before. But I did eventually end up writing a long letter, and I wanted more clarification. And I would have liked an apology, but I think that would be asking too much. So anyway, it's come to a head where, but anyway, I just wanted to focus on the fact that the mindfulness has helped me to see and capture the workings of my mind. And this is what I think is a strength of Buddhism. It's very psychological, and of course, we cannot always be as calm and collected as I was then. When things are very serious, I mean, you would react. So, but nevertheless, I think more of our relation, um, uh, things that happen to us can become more under control. So, okay, uh, I I I I decided to talk about my experience because um, I can talk about the greedy dog and the puppy, but I think each of us needs to take an experience from your own life and apply it because that makes more sense. Okay, so I'm gonna have to kind of hurry up here. Okay, the second truth, as you know, is a cause of suffering lies in our attachments or the three poisons. And in English, we use words like attachments, defilements, afflictions, blind passions, etc. And there are as many as 108 attachments and blind passions. That's why in Japan, when they ring the bell at the New Year's at the temple, they hit 108 times to get rid of the 108 um, attachments that we have. That's kind of symbolic hitting of the gong. But often we talk about three poisons, and I won't need to go into depth here. But gas is one way that we talk about it, more humorous, and you can remember. So please remember, gas. I have also created one myself, DAI, die. Well, these are the cause of you will die spiritually, and it's desire, aversion, ignorance. Okay, so I have a copyright on this, so don't use it without acknowledging it. Okay, vacuum cleaner joke. You know this joke? Oh, I don't even have it's in the book. Why couldn't the Buddha vacuum under the sofa? The narrow space under the sofa? The reason is he had no attachments. Okay? If you didn't get that, then you have to study more because it goes to the heart of what we're talking about here. The third truth is our suffering ceases when awakening or change in outlook is realized. So I keep talking about these words: awakening, change, transformation. And this is often referred to as nirvana. And nirvana, by the way, is not is extinction. It's an extinction of gas, the blind passions and the attachments. It's not extinguishing ourselves, okay? And there was a famous British and also an American band called Nirvana. And when they were responding as to why they call themselves Nirvana, uh, an explanation went as such. Nirvana means a transformed state of personality characterized by compassion, peace, deep spiritual joy, and an absence of negative mental states and emotions such as doubt, worry, anxiety, and fear. So, and then we talked about transformation and change. You know this one. This is even a better one. The Buddha, not Buddha, a monk, a Buddhist monk, paid for a hot dog. He gave $20, and he was expecting his change back, but he wouldn't come back to him. He couldn't. The vendor wouldn't give him the change, so he waited for a minute or two because he's supposed to be a monk and he has to be patient. Finally, he couldn't wait anymore, so he says, "Well, where is my change?" And the vendor says to the monk, "Sir, the change must come from within you." Okay, you like that? I think okay. Okay, so now having talked about nirvana and extinguishing suffering, I want to point out the fact that we lay people cannot overcome suffering completely. If you're Buddha, you can, you know. But nevertheless, we as lay people, we can, however, better understand why we suffer. Okay. I think this is important. We're suffering because we're being greedy, or you want more than we should, uh, have, or so that logic or that explanation is important for us to know. And I believe we can certainly reduce the level of our suffering or the level of problems that we cause. And so, had I not been practicing and known Buddhism 25 years ago, 30 years ago, what had happened in the example I gave, I could have gotten into a very heated discussion, on Zoom meeting, and would have created a real bad situation for the organization. Fourth truth is the last one on the Four Noble Path, but this one we will deal with next month. So, in detail. Okay, so I need to kind of. So, the aim of Buddhism is to deal with dukkha or suffering of an awakened way of life. And I had mentioned this earlier. So that's why the Four Noble Truths, the most important teaching, deals with suffering. And one thing that I want to point out, and I will bring this up again, is that there is a difference between difficulties and dukkha. The former has to do with the objective dimension, while the latter has to do with the subjective dimension of our lives. The former has to do with what happens to us, while the latter has to do with how we respond to it. So, one verse that I like is difficulties are mandatory. In other words, difficulties happen, but how we deal with it and how we respond is the essence of Buddhism. And so suffering is optional. So difficulties and suffering are not the same. There are two different things on two different levels. And so what we do in Buddhism is to cultivate the vertical dimension so that when difficulties happen on the horizontal, you suffer less. Buddha obviously suffers less. Okay. Okay. So, but despite this reality, Buddhist temples in Japan, it's really kind of sad, in my opinion, is that people think that Buddhism will help them on a horizontal level, especially in terms of getting what they want. So, the temples sell, trinkets and talis, omamori is like charms to help them to reduce difficulties. I would buy them if they really work. But nevertheless, the problem is that people think that the Buddhism, at least in many people in Japan, they deep down they understand, but they look at the temple as a place to reduce difficulties on the horizontal level, when in fact Buddhism is dealing with the vertical dimension. By cultivating yourself, you go up the vertical ladder and be able to deal with what happens on the horizontal. Okay, I'm going to skip this part, and then I said this earlier, and lay people cannot completely eliminate suffering, but we can certainly know why we suffer, and we can reduce it in terms of degree. And then Buddhism is not concerned about how the world began, or how large the universe is, and I don't have much time, so I would ask you to look at the textbook and hear. And Buddhism is basically saying that each of us is like this man who is shot by an arrow. The arrow is stuck, and so the issue is to get the arrow out, pull the arrow out, and not to ask these unmeaningful questions. How, who shot me, and what is the arrow made out of? And that is like asking how large is the universe, when the universe began, when in fact you should really look at the Four Noble Truths and practice them. And so Buddhism tends to be very kind of, my oriented first person, which is true, but it does not mean that it is unconcerned about the happiness of the world. I mentioned the example of, the war in Ukraine and how that was brought about, in my opinion, by, Putin's, aggressiveness and his greed. And so certainly he has his reasons, but it's greed nevertheless. And Buddhism has been socially engaged, and it's really it doesn't mean that Buddhism only is concerned about the individual, but it is, once you kind of straighten yourself to some degree, you will have more wisdom and compassion for others. And so we know we all have lamented the passing, maybe not all, but I certainly feel sad about the former President Jimmy Carter. The more we know about him, I think what he stood for is more in accord with the Four Noble Truths. But he did it in a real live world. And he was not quite successful all the time. But I think that his spirit is important. And I hope that his spirit will have more impact on the world from more on. I certainly would like to keep him in mind and to remember what he stood for and try to apply that in my life in the in what I can do for as a member of the society. Finally, again, difficulties are mandatory, but suffering is optional. Okay, so again, we don't have time for a Q&A for my section, but if you can stay for the Nirvana hour afterwards, yeah, you can always send me email. Okay, so we would like to go to our guest speakers. Today we're fortunate to have Kaethe Kauffman from Honolulu. Uh, uh, she has a PhD in a field that I kind of forgot, so that will give you a chance for Kaethe, for you to, in your first 2 or 3 5 minutes, to talk about your background, and we are very happy to. We look forward to hearing about how the Four Noble Truths have impacted your life. And so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sensei. I did have a question. Did you
Yeah.
want me to include the Eightfold Path today or not?
No, you can, because if you prepared for it, right?
Right. Yes.
Yeah. So no, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do that. So what I'm going to do as a way of introduction, rather than introduce myself separately, I'll be giving examples from my life of examples of each of the Four Noble Truths. And I think you'll get to know me probably better than you ever wanted to in this way. So now Sensei has wonderfully reviewed the Four Noble Truths, so I won't describe them further, but I will just say that an example from my life of the first noble truth of what suffering consists of. This example I'm going to choose is death. That had a huge impact on me with the death of my father at age 8. I was present. He died of a coronary. It was not short. It was a long process and quite a bit of suffering for him and myself and my family. So that would be the first one. The second one, the causes of suffering, as terrible as his death was, I would say that the causes of suffering were even worse for me. They impacted me for nearly the rest of my life. And what Sensei talked about, the attachments, were profound. The reason was on January 7th, 1957, I became angry at my father. And my father was a loving person. He had a good heart. He was a good father. And I loved him and he loved me. However, he could do things at times that were mean. And on that day, he did a very mean thing. And I became not only angry, I became furious. And I ran into my room sobbing and I wished him dead. I cursed him. And 6 hours later, he died. That was a big illusion because as I stood, I didn't know anything about shock. And as I stood there, I felt as though I were a piece of ice, and that ice had on top of it where my head would be a little ticker tape running along, completely devoid of emotion, and just saying the words very realistically, Dad is dying. And well, no wonder. I wished him dead, and this is what is now happening. And of course, I felt that I was the cause, that I was causing this to happen, because at 8 years old, with magical thinking, I felt that powerful. That was a pretty big illusion. And it was a very convincing one. I felt convinced of that for many, many years. Oh, the next day and weeks that went on, I was consumed with guilt and shame. Luckily, I wrote in my diary every day. I love my diary. And I wrote everything that happened, and I was trying to figure it out. And what I decided was that I had done something really bad, and but if I had the power, if I had that kind of power, I also had the power to work really hard and pay for it, to make up to my family for this disaster. That was a continuation of the illusion of the magical thinking, but it seemed to me like it was a good solution. And I think I had good intentions. However, I was also creating a formula for my life, the way I would live my life, and it wasn't a very good formula. Because what I wanted to accomplish in this is I really wanted to work. I wanted to make up for it. I wanted to work hard, help my family. I had 2 older brothers who were teenagers, and of course my mother. And what I wanted to do is work hard enough that I could earn their respect and their love. We did not have loving relationships with either my brothers or my mother. Didn't exist. But I thought if I worked hard enough, I could create that. And I did my utmost. But when you're living in an illusion, there is suffering, as we learn. And because I felt so powerful, I would allow disrespect, and I allowed people to take advantage of me because I felt strong and powerful enough to handle it. And I wanted to make up for what I'd done. So these were the attachments that I formed at that age, that I had the power to control life and death. So that's enough of that illusion. What Sensei teaches us is that I was certainly in the grip of gas, greed, anger, stupidity. And Sensei often adds, and I add here, pride, because that was a big feeling, powerful and in control. Pride was a big part of the illusion that I was having. Sometimes I think of this as ego, and sometimes the Shin Buddhist self-power. And I have to say, as I describe these things, I'm really aware that I'm not, these are purely my own examples. This certainly might not be your experience. It's my interpretation. So on number 3, that suffering ceases with awakening or change in outlook, and it can lead to reducing suffering, and the Eightfold Path is what leads to this. So I'm going to briefly go over the Eightfold Path and how I was able to, bit by bit, slowly extract myself from this illusion. I'll go over in the order in which these occurred to me, not in the order in the book. And I'll go over first the experiences of childhood and then the experiences as an adult. So the first thing that struck me was right effort. As a child, as I said, I wrote a lot. I wrote in journals. I also drew and painted things important to me. And these, I realize now that these were ways I was trying to understand reality, and under a reality I could depend on. My parents did their best. They were both heavy alcohol drinkers, and so life got pretty confusing at times. So that was my way. And I think that for me as a child, that was a right effort. I was really trying to understand the world in a better way. And then also when I was a teenager, right view. Oh, excuse me. I'm going to go next to right concentration or meditation. When I was 10, I was very fortunate that a third cousin who was an adult already, taught me relaxation techniques and taught me that I could see images in my mind and that I could use those images to relax, like floating on clouds or floating along in a boat. And the person taught me that I could see that thoughts would come across my mind and that I could learn to observe those thoughts. I could actually see them. And there would be positive thoughts and there would be negative thoughts. The thing he taught me that was real critical was he told me I didn't have to believe the thoughts. And I had an awful lot of self-condemnation going on. So that was fabulous. In fact, I got so excited about this. I thought, why don't they teach this in school? Everybody should know this. He'd also taught me how to, that I could create positive thoughts. And he taught me the way to best do that. So this was fabulous. I wrote in my journal every day about the thoughts I saw and about how to create positive ones and the ones I didn't want anymore. And I think this process really, as a child, really helped heal this trauma that I went through. So that for me as a child was right concentration or meditation. The right view, now I go to a teenager when I'm on the University of Washington campus. I've tried several majors my first year, failed at all of them, felt like a failure. And I was walking across campus at sunset. And if any of you know the quad at the University of Washington, it has a gorgeous view of Mount Rainier when there's no clouds. Usually there's clouds. But at this moment, the clouds dropped away and there was Mount Rainier at sunset looking like a giant orange sherbet ice cream cone. And I just had this moment I can only describe as Satori. It was, I felt astounded. My mouth dropped open. And I felt feelings, and the feelings coalesced into words. And the words were that whatever career path you choose, you need to focus. In fact, you must focus on your own inner development. That had to be the top priority, not earning money or not prestige. And that had to be the focus. And that resonated with me. I took that seriously. And that became, for me at that age, that was right view. Right intention was, I was able to study Buddhism at the University of Washington. They had a great Asian studies department. And I remember my first class in Buddhism, and they taught me about illusion. And I reacted strongly to that word because I didn't know what it was. And it was kind of threatening to me. And I thought, what illusion? I'm just a kid working 2 jobs to put myself through school. Where's the illusion in that? Like life seemed pretty straightforward. Needless to say, I had pretty much completely buried the resolutions I'd made after Dad died and the fact that I was living my life according to a formula that wasn't working awfully well. And but I remained unaware of that. So, but what I felt was stuck. I felt lost and I felt stuck, and I didn't understand why. And that was the gift, because Buddhism classes introduced me to the concept of illusion. And I had an uncomfortable feeling around that. But I had a lot of curiosity. I want to know more. What the heck is this about? So that was the gift that, and I've never forgotten that. And to this day, I'm still unraveling the illusions I get caught up in. So then I'll look towards right conduct. As I grew up, eventually it occurred to me that this experience I'd had, where I felt as though I'd had the control over my father's death, that experience was a little weird, actually. And my rational mind would ask myself sometimes, did I really have that power? And the rational mind would say, well, no, of course not. That's ridiculous. But the inner experience was so powerful and so formative that for years, I still had to keep answering yes. I had some kind of control. And the degree to which I had that was the degree to which I was still in the grip of self-power, or GAS, and I add the P, GASP, greed, anger, stupidity, and pride, and my illusion of control. So that was, at least I began to question my conduct. So this is right conduct. I began to question it. And I began to be open to exploring other truths through therapy. So that the therapy was also right conduct for me at that time. Okay, now I'll go over some of the Eightfold Path in terms of an adult perspective. So going back to right effort and writing in journals, drawing and painting my experiences, I added that. I kept on doing those through adulthood, and I added my study of Buddhism and meditation. I kept on with those, and all those efforts meant that eventually I began to be able to detach from self-drama, my own dramas, from family dramas, and from dramas of others that I got involved in. So that it started to work. I started to be able to release my ego, and that for me was right effort. And then the right concentration and meditation, I've continued since then to always need moments of calm each day, to try and see situations clearly, observe my thoughts, observe my ego at work. And that's something I've continued also to this day. And then the right view, luckily I've been able to really deepen that. That's when I committed to my inner development with good old Mount Rainier. And Sensei's written in his book, Live According to the Truth of Constant Change, which was impermanence. And to me, that's profound, because eventually I was able to do that, and to realize that my father's death was a result of impermanence, and it was not a result of my control. So that's a real deepening of that right view for me. Right intention was getting stuck in illusion and questioning the illusions. What are they? And that was right intention, right intention. And so I've kept my commitment to that as best I could. Understanding the illusions, how they're operating in my life, dissecting them, and making changes that are more closely aligned to reality. I discovered in this that I really love my illusions. I really far prefer them in many cases. But the thing is, learning about reality as it is, it's more important. So every day I set an intention to hope that I can know and accept reality as it is, rather than live in my favorite delusions. Okay, so that was right intention, and then right conduct. Again, as I mentioned, therapy helping me to unwind the illusions I was caught in. And I have to add here, I did a 3-day retreat of Nikon, the Japanese therapy process with Reverend Mari Sangoku. That was a profound experience. It was the tipping point for me. I did that about 15 or 18 years ago, and the tipping point where I finally was able to totally accept I had no control over my father's death. It was a incredible experience. So the right conduct also involved, I made a commitment to teach, to promote inner development and inner truths with others as much as I could. And that leads to right livelihood, where I had a degree in Asian studies. I got a few more degrees in art, the PhDs in art history. And so I have spent a career promoting inner truths and growth through art. That has felt like the right thing to do. So that for me was right livelihood. Of course, being a professor involves a lot of public speaking, so that leads to right speech. And as Sensei mentioned in his talk, rather than blurt things out, I do make an effort every day to pause before I speak. I call this the sanity pause, and I just pause a moment and hope for the highest good. I can say something that's for the highest good. And that's my sanity pause. So that's for me is right speech. And the last one, right mindfulness, is again learning in daily situations to be more aware. For me, mindfulness is awareness. And by having quiet moments when I can become more aware of my greed, anger, stupidity, pride, ego, illusions. And I can just sometimes I just ask myself, I'll become aware of a situation or a conflict, and I'll just say, you know what, mind, can my ego just detach from this? Is that something that's possible right now? And 99% of the time, the answer is yes. And I go, oh, great. I'd like to do that. I'd like to detach from this. Sometimes the answer is no, because I'm too caught up in it, and I need to be caught up a little longer before I can see it clearly. But almost always the answer is yes. So that's pretty nice. In summary, Sensei talks about it. If we think and we speak the right way, it leads to right action, which leads to karma or behavior patterns, and which can reduce the suffering for me and for others. So overall, change within is possible, I have discovered, and that is the blessings of impermanence. Sensei mentions that with this process, we can gain control of greed, anger, stupidity, and pride, and I have found that to be true. I've been able to release enough self-power to gain some equanimity and understanding and compassion for myself and others. So I'm here to say the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path really work. So with that, I finish, but I'm open to questions.
Okay, thank you. That's so, thank you for sharing something that's very personal. And when I first heard about, your situation with your father, boy, it must have been awfully difficult, at that age to really think that you had something that you caused your father's death. But anyway, I before I open it up, I just wanted to acknowledge your contribution of adding the P to gas to make a gasp, which is really great. Next time I write about it, I'll certainly give you credit for, because actually it's really there are the six major, actually in Mahayana Buddhism, there's a six major attachments, and the deepest ones are gas plus pride. So you're in keeping with the basic doctrine of Mahayana Buddhism or basic Buddhism. So pride is that which really, feeds our ego, and it's something that's very deep-seated. Pride is, very important to us, whether you know it or not. So, okay, we have a few minutes for Kaethe. Any questions, comments? Well, people probably are kind of mesmerized or, really in deep thought about what you had shared. No. Nobody? Oh,
I
okay, Sharon.
yeah, I was curious how you got into this Four Noble Truths and what you talked about and tying it into art and so on. Like, did you just were curious about Buddhism, or you got introduced and then you thought, oh, I can really change my guilt and everything else by putting those values, those teachings into my experience and my difficult life? Like, how did you get into tying the religious aspect of it into your daily life and what occurred in your childhood?
Okay, that's a great question. Well, when I took the classes in Buddhism at University of Washington, it was, even though I'd learned meditation, and part of my family is Japanese American, so I'd been raised going to Buddhist funerals and weddings, but they're not religious, so there wasn't much doctrine. So when I started taking the classes, that's when things started clicking. Like, I didn't even realize the relaxation methods a cousin taught me were meditation. Only when I started taking classes, I go, oh, that was meditation. And then I go, oh, there's illusion. Do I have illusions? And so it's like the classes really helped me fit it all into a context. Because before that, it was just random, weird life. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it
Kaethe.
does.
Oh, okay. Is that Sharon okay?
Yeah, it does make me aware about Reverend Ken, how the reason why I make an effort to take your classes, because often you can live your life and you just get involved in all the things that happen. But what she's saying is that sometimes when the educational aspect and reading something and then kind of tying that into your own experiences, that's when I think the religion has a deeper meaning
Yeah.
in your own personal life.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And that's what happens when you go to a temple and hear the teachings and have discussions and in classes like that, you have to, turn it on to yourself. And not like, a lot of the Japanese so-called Buddhists who go to temples to, kind of pray for things. And that's not really getting to the heart of it, obviously. But okay, sorry, Kaethe, you have any response to what Sharon's anymore? Or if you're done, that's
Just to
fine.
reiterate, it's really, really important to learn, be educated, and then have this context. I mean, I didn't know my life was fitting in a larger context. I really didn't know. I had to discover that. And fortunately, the classes on Buddhism created that context where I finally saw how things were fitting in and working together.
Yeah. Okay, I think that points to the importance of, education and reflections which can come from the Dharma that is available to us. And most of you are doing exactly that, partaking of the Dharma and applying it to your life. Okay, so again, if you have more questions for Kaethe and Hoshina, who is coming up next, stay around for the Nirvana hour and and ask them more questions in detail. Okay, so with that, Hoshina Seki is the president of the American Buddhist Academy in New York, and this academy is I have known this academy for a long time. It's been around right after I don't know exactly when it started, but after the Second World War, it was like the center of Buddhist activity on the East Coast, and you had people like D.T. Suzuki giving lectures there and had an enormous impact on Buddhism in America. And it was started by his father, Reverend Seki, and his mother, her mother. And so Hoshina is here to share with us her life, which which reflects the mistake that I just made because I had known her before. And so with that, with a sense of a little bit of an apology for that, Hoshina, would you please? Where are you? Oh, I saw her earlier. Oh, Hoshina, you're muted.
Okay, I'm on.
Okay, good. Now you're on. All
Hey,
right.
I hope you can see me. Thank you, Reverend Ken Tanaka, for asking me to participate in this discussion on the Four Noble Truths. I am deeply grateful. And I also want to thank Kaethe Kauffman for your nice presentation. I learned a lot, so thank you very much. And I like to thank all of you who are participating and wanting to hear what I have to say, or maybe not, I don't know. But anyway, my name is Hoshina Seki, and I'm transgender. And my father started the American Buddhist Academy in 1951. In 1999, we changed the name to American Buddhist Study Center.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's what
Sorry about that. Yeah.
It's okay. It's all right, Ken. It's okay. And if you're interested, you can just go online to ambuddhist.org. That's our website. And then you can see what we're doing. But I'm here to tell you about my life, the Four Noble Truths. But before I start, I wasn't sure how to start. So I thought maybe I should tell a joke. So I'm going to start with a joke. And I don't know, Ken knows all the Buddhist jokes, so he might know this one
I'm
already.
surprised. I'm great to know that you have some good jokes for us. Okay.
Okay, so there's a smart man, a Jodo Shinshu minister, and the little boy are on a plane about to crash. The plane has only 2 parachutes. What to do? The smart man grabs the first parachute and says, "The world needs me," and then jumps out of the plane. The Jodo Shinshu minister tells the little boy to take the second parachute because his whole life is ahead of him. The little boy said, "Don't worry, Sensei, we can both jump out because there are 2 parachutes left." The Jodo Shinshu minister looked puzzled and said, "How can that be?" And the little boy said, "The smart man jumped out with my backpack."
Okay.
So the moral of this story is a smart man is a man with a closed mind. The Jodo Shinshu minister is a man with wisdom and compassion. And the little boy is a beginner's mind. So that's my joke. Now, I'll tell you the story of my transgender journey, which covers the Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path. But I'm going to just tell you my life story, and I think you'll see where I tick off all the buttons of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. The first lesson in judo is learning how to fall without getting hurt. You curve your body when you fall and you roll over. Practicing this technique many times automatically and instinctively teaches you the art of falling without getting hurt. What did this have to do with me? Literally, I was falling and rolling for most of my life, not understanding my feelings and closing myself off from everyone around me. Little did I care that I was a member of a family, a church, a community, a country, and the universe. My mind was not interconnected, but disconnected. I was born 9 months before Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. All during World War II, my mother, brother, and I stayed in New York City, living in an apartment above the New York Buddhist Church. Even though we were Japanese Americans, we weren't sent to an internment camp because we lived far from the West Coast. However, my father, being a Jodo Shinshu minister and a Japanese national, was sent to an internment camp in Idaho. My mother, Sangha members like Stanley Okada, Zaichi Nobumoto, and Reverend Newton Ishiura kept the church open and held Sunday services. Many Jodo Shinshu 442 Nisei soldiers attended before deployed to the European front. My brother and I were temple kids. Hoken was 6 years older and very protective of his little brother, me. As we were often called Japs and subject to other racist remarks, he got into a lot of fights. I was a church kid growing up in a Dharma candy store. The Dharma was all around me, and I was unaware of how it penetrated into me. Yet, I was a very confused kid. Growing up in the late 40s and 50s, I thought there was no one else like me, having feelings of wanting to be a girl at the same time, and then being very happy that I was a boy. Also, being a Japanese American added another dimension to my confusion. The Japanese way is to honor your heritage, be respectful, give gratitude, have a strong family bond, carry on, accept what life gave you, and be grateful for being the minister's kid. So being born male and having thoughts of being a girl was killing me. How could I approach my parents to tell them when my mother says to me, how lucky you are to have been born a boy, and my dad says he is proud of having a son? Instead of telling them my feelings, my way of dealing with it was to ignore those other feelings. As a temple kid, I attended all Sunday services while my mother played the piano. On Saturday, I attended Japanese school at church. My parents realized that I was no ordinary boy and something was bothering me. I refused to tell them because I didn't want to burden them because of everything happening at the church. In the 50s, the church was a community center for many Japanese and Japanese Americans. I remember all the events at the church, from the Hanamatsuri service and the Obon Festival to summer picnics, camps, Japanese movies, and Mr. Onihashi preparing mochitsuki in the backyard shed. In between, there were wedding, funerals, and many memorial services. Instead of figuring out my feelings, I blocked it out of my mind and hoped those feelings would pass, but they would not go away. The result was I did poorly in school because I had difficulty concentrating. I hung out with all the school rebels and started drinking in my teens. I graduated from high school, but dropped out of college. My brother, on the other hand, excelled in his studies, and became a successful lawyer. I had no skills or ambitions. I was a mess in those days. I bounced around from one job to another. I worked at a golf station, Seabrook Farms, Japan Food Corporation, and restaurants. Then I found a job in New York at a small community newspaper. I liked this job because I was good at typing. From there, I got a job at Bloomingdale's advertising department and took courses at the School of Visual Arts to learn graphic design and advertising. Then a friend told me about a production job at another department store. I got it and moved up, and by now, editing the ads that go into the newspapers. From there, I kept moving up until I became the creative director for the Gannett Company and the production director for the Gannett newspaper division. However, before all that, at 22, I married an Italian woman with 3 kids. I was suffering from my trans feelings and thoughts. By marrying, it would go away. How selfish I was, thinking only of my needs and not realizing the impact it would have on someone else's life with 3 kids. And all the suffering and pain I caused to my parents and brother. My parents couldn't understand why Josephine wanted to marry me. My father warned Joe that I was not the person she thought I was. Little did they know that Joe was also suffering as much as I was, being in a bad marriage. She got divorced and we got married. We were a perfect misfit match. We both needed someone to hold on to. It took years of therapy to learn the truth of why we did the things we did. That is a whole nother story. Early in our marriage, I told Joe about my feelings, and she insisted I get into therapy. Our 3 boys, Louis, Vincent, and Ralph, were also suffering as well. We ended up all in therapy. We were the perfect example of a dysfunctional family. Sadly, Louis turned into a drug addict and died in jail after a needle he used with a person who had HIV/AIDS. Vincent also got into drugs, but was able to kick it by going to several rehab centers. He became a massage therapist. Ralph, the oldest son, didn't go down the drug road. He is now a successful owner of Broadway limousine service, which caters to Broadway actors. I did not go for my transgender surgery until 1 year after my mother's passing. I was 71 years old. By then, our therapist knew that this was what I wanted to do and gave me a letter saying I would be a good candidate for reassignment surgery. Joe had a hard time accepting it. However, we are still married but separated. I now live in the senior community in New Jersey, and Joe still lives in our house. I thought I was living in one world and everyone else was living in another. How wrong I was. We are all interconnected and live in one world. A lot has changed in the world since I was growing up, but one thing that has not changed is a human being and knowing that Amida Buddha is always watching and protecting my dark heart. I like to end with a poem. Lost and confused have I been for a long, long time. While being lost and confused, I never knew that I was lost and confused. That was by an unknown Chin poet. There's a
Okay.
song.
Are you
go ahead.
done?
Just about.
Oh, okay. So go ahead.
One more thing. I just want to say, I am free now, shedding all the past unspoken words. I'm unsure who said this, but this is a perfect close. Do all you can to become truly happy in life, which is what the Buddha awakening is all about. So, thank you.
Well, thank you, Hoshina, for sharing something that's very, very personal. And I understand that you were one of the two speakers at a Buddhist conference where you shared that
Yes.
story. Yeah.
I was at the FWBA, Federation of Buddhist Women's Association, I believe that's the
Yeah.
and it was at their national conference in San Jose.
Yes. And I'm sure it was well received. And, you know, what do you think? Like 50 years ago, the world was not as understanding. Was that one of the reasons why that intensified the conflict? But now it's much easier.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it, Ken.
Yeah.
50 years ago, it wasn't anything like it is today. I didn't know of an LGBTQ groups or other people of the LGBTQ community. And I really lived in a very cocooned life, living in the temple. And you know, there was no one that I knew who was like me, or gay, or lesbian, or anything else like that.
Yeah. Actually, from my experience, Buddhist temples or Buddhism as a whole, especially in America, and especially Shin Buddhism, it has been quite open. And I know of ministers who have conducted, gay marriages, lesbian marriages, decades ago. And so I think I'm proud to be part of that organization, which really practices compassion and openness, and so okay. Anybody comments, questions?
I just wanted to say thank you, both speakers today.
Yeah.
Very powerful. Touched my heart.
Yeah. Certainly. Steve.
I just wanted to thank Hoshina for telling her story again. I've heard it before in other versions of it, but it really takes a lot to to bring forth this life story. But I also give her a lot of credit for to be seen, and I think that having that representation has allowed many others within the Buddhist community to also identify as transgender and be in a position to be accepting of themselves. And since I've known Hoshina as a transgender woman, I've known many other young adults who have had the courage to come out and declare their transgender identity also. So thank you, Hoshina, for being there, for being that representation for this community within our Shin Buddhist community.
Thank you, Stephen.
Hi, may I echo, may I say something?
Sure.
Hi, I'd like to echo what was just said, both of our speakers today. Very moving, thank you. With regards to Hoshina, in October, I live in Hawaii, and we had a wonderful sort of like conference, And Hoshina, are you familiar with Marsha Azumi and Aiden Azumi? He's a transgender male.
Yeah, I'm very, very familiar with them.
Okay, wonderful. Well, in
Yeah.
Hawaii, in Honganji, about a year ago, we put out a pamphlet about, coming out for anyone who wants to read it. And I and another person are working on a pamphlet how to support the families and friends of someone who comes out gay or transgender or, in the LGBTQ community. And I met with two parents whose daughter is gay and got married, and I was asking them, what would be more supportive? What can we do, Honganji in Hawaii, to provide more support in that case? And a very good idea came out that they feel that, I know Reverend Tanaka just said, for decades now, Jodo Shinshu reverends have married, yeah? Have they come out and said in their Dharma talks, this is the person that was talking, feels that reverends should come out in their Dharma talks about being gay and what it means to be gay and how to support it in the Jodo Shinshu tradition. Would you comment on that, please? Or anyone?
Oh,
Are you okay? Anybody like to pick that up? I'm not quite sure your question. Are you asking whether the ministers, have talked about transgender and gay issues, or have? I think some definitely. I'm sure that in the course of their sermons, they have talked about it, and hopefully, express their openness to it.
Yeah.
Buddhism doesn't have the same, the hardline attitude that some of the fundamentalists have in, other traditions. So yeah, but they have
Yeah.
married many of them, and for a long time. Okay,
Okay.
so yeah, thank you, Stephen. Kaethe.
Yeah, hi. I also want to thank the speakers, and for Stephen. I go to the Pasadena Buddhist Temple, and Reverend Gibbs there. We've had Marsha and Aiden speak at our temple. We have worked with Gardena Buddhist Church also, which has the Reverend Tanaka. You might know the name of it. I'm going to forget. No. What is the name of their organization that is promoting understanding for the LGBTQ community?
Yeah.
And they sponsor seminars, and
I see.
so we've had that in the Southern District, BCA. But I also wanted to thank Hoshina, because if it wasn't for the New York Buddhist Church, I wouldn't be here. My parents met at the New York Buddhist Church in 1948. My father was a PI from Tacoma and got out and was in New York. My mother was from Hilo, Hawaii, and was in New York. And it was the New York Buddhist Church. I don't know what kind of social events you had there, but you certainly invited the young folk to come on. And they eventually did get married and settled in Tacoma, and here I am. But we did go back to New York because early Kaethe was from my mother's temple in Puna, I think, back in the day. And we had a memorial service for my parents in New York. They both long since passed away, but many wonderful feelings. And it was nice to hear about that. And
okay. Well, that's a wonderful story, to how they met in New York at the temple. And okay.
Sensei, there is a question in the chat from Anita.
Okay, go ahead.
It's for Hoshina. Anita says, thank you for sharing. Young people are still searching. How may Buddhism speak to them? Any suggestions on how we as Buddhists respond and guide?
That's a excellent question from Anita. Right. Well, I think as Ken mentioned, that in Shin Buddhism, there's come as you are and openness for the LGBTQ community folks. So I think that they should just extend that. And what Stephen was saying in Hawaii, on the mainland, you know, we have Jodo Shinshu ministers who are LGBTQ. So in their talks, they come out and they talk about themselves and their journey as well. And in fact, actually, this coming Sunday, Reverend Gary Jaskula is going to be marrying one of our board members to his partner. So it's quite exciting.
I see. Okay, Hoshina, in light of our theme today, which is on Four Noble Truths, how would you say about the role of the Four Noble Truths in helping you to kind of come to acceptance and, well, maybe coming out? And can you say a little bit more about that?
Sure, I can say a little bit more. I could say, you know, I have a different feeling. Well, the Four Noble Truths is a profound document, more or less. But I think in the first Noble Truth of suffering, I equate it to stress in life. And I had a tremendous amount of stress in my life, tremendous. And the second Noble Truth, I felt that this stress, I was trying to find happiness, but there was no happiness. And I was picking on all the things that I thought would make me happy. They weren't making me happy because of all the wrong directions I was going. And then the third Noble Truth is to become unstuck, to get unstressed. And nirvana was a way to get unstuck. I felt that in my life, I felt that what I was going through, I was like it was like I have an example here. It's like a candle flame, which represents the grasping of my things that tried to make me happy. When that grasping is blown out, discover nirvana. And here all along, within and around us. So I put out that flame. And then, of course, everyone can reach nirvana by doing the Eightfold Path. And I can go into that. I think these are good examples, and I think you can relate to my story. I'm not going to list it each individual, but right view, when we see the world as it truly is, like a Buddha, we can see that everything changes and nothing contains any unchanged part within it. Everything depends upon other things and is connected to everything else. When we ignore these truths, we get stressed out. Right intention. When we see the world as it truly is, our thoughts and actions will be filled with wisdom, compassion, and generosity. Now, let me see, I'm going to go on. Right speech. When we see the world as it truly is, we are mindful of how our speech affects others, and I certainly learned that. We do not lie. I lied all the time. Say unkind things or gossip. I gossip and said terrible things. Right action. When we see the world as it truly is, we are mindful of how our actions affect others. I was blind. I didn't know what my actions were doing. We do not harm ourselves. I certainly did, or other beings. I certainly did that too, through our actions, through my actions. We are kind and gentle to every living thing, protecting all that are weaker than ourselves, and I learned that. And right livelihood, when we see the world as it truly is, we realize that we are all connected, and we resolve to do work that benefit others and does not harm them. I learned that. Right mindfulness, when we see the world as it truly is, we can remain mindful of the Buddhist teachings in our daily lives. And that was, I think the Dharma was with me all my life. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. Right?
Okay.
Right meditation is the 8th. When we see the world as it truly is, we learned how to harness the power of the mind to deepen our understanding of wisdom, compassion, and generosity.
Well, thank you. We need to bring it to a close, but I just have one last question. What triggered your change to go from egocentric way of being to maybe accepting your condition, situation? What was that, a particular time in your life, and how, and yeah.
Yeah, I like that question. I think I want to authenticate myself.
Authenticate, I see.
Right. I want to find my real self.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think I found my real self. And some people have said to me, well, you don't have to do a reassignment surgery. You can just be who you want to be. But biologically, you would still be male.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt that wasn't really authenticating myself. And I think within the transgender community, there are those who are transgender, but not biologically.
I see. So you came to a point where you made a full authentication of accepting yourself as who you are, and maybe because of Amida's compassion, accept you for who you are. Did that help too?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, we certainly want to pursue further, but time is up. So again, we want to thank Hoshina and Kaethe for their wonderful presentation. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you so much. Okay, Igor, can you bring it to a close?
Sure, Sensei. This concludes the formal presentations for today's session. We hope you found it instructive and meaningful. The link for the video recording will be sent to you in a couple of days. Please make use of it to deepen your understanding and for responding to the questionnaire. Our informal group discussion, the Nirvana Happy Hour with our guest speakers and Dr. Tanaka, will begin soon. This informal and relaxed setting is never recorded. It is a great time to ask the questions you hesitated to ask before. Everyone is welcome. The Nirvana Happy Hour is strictly optional and will begin after we take a short 5-minute break. For everyone else, we look forward to seeing you again at our in-depth discussion session in about 2 weeks. Dr. Tanaka will send out an email with a date. Our next Fireside Chat session will be February 1, when we will begin to understand one of the most misunderstood concepts in Buddhism, the role of karma in our lives. Until then, please stay well and best wishes in your efforts to understand the Dharma, both intellectually and spiritually. And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thank you. Take care.